When darling of the animal rights extremists George Monbiot announced in January 2022 that he backs trophy hunting as a tool for conservation, it was like that moment when Russell Crowe said, "Unleash hell," but in a more vegan way. Here's George's most plaintive tweet. Getting a good monstering from comedians and actors such as Peter Egan is normal for the world's greatest conservationists, hunters, as deer manager Neil Rowntree explains to me at the Safari Club International Convention.
To me it's been incredible. I mean, I've been a deer stalker all my life, fourth generation of it, and none of my family had ever experienced anything like we have in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, we've had telephone calls to the house, we've had people wishing death and disease on the children, asking that I should die, saying we've shared your address, they're coming to get you, sharing vehicle registration numbers. Some of the guys that work for me go sharing pictures and saying this is the guys you want. One of them ended up, I think it was a 67-year-old grandmother from Wales who was actually orchestrating this whole furore around feral goats.
The people who issue death threats choose their victims across the English-speaking world. Tom Opre is an award-winning filmmaker. His films are pro-hunting, and that makes him a target.
We're seeing social media being weaponized by groups that have ulterior motives. These groups are not wildlife conservation groups. I mean, they're literally the antichrist of wildlife conservation. They're 180 degrees the other side of it. Whereas hunters and hunting groups are spending the time and energy, as I mentioned earlier, to go out and make sure that we have these resources, that we have clean water, that we have healthy forests, that we have vibrant wildlife populations. And I don't know about you, at the end of the day, I want a clean earth. I want to leave this place better than we found it. But unfortunately, the weaponization of social media, the ignorance that we have amongst people that don't really understand our modern conservation model, and that's allowed them to sit behind their keyboards and talk to people. And because we have all this separation now, we don't, if you were going and seeing somebody at church or at school or at the local grocery store, I don't think you would say, hey, I'd like to see your wife have her head cut off and a native, defecate down it. Or I'd like to see your children killed and skinned up and hung in my house. These are the kinds of things that people post. And it's not one or two, it's thousands of people.
You really get slammed to the ground and you are shocked by the way that people portray you or want to portray you or bombard you with all this negativity, with all this attack, with all this slander, and without even having an ear or empathy for who we are as a people, how far we've come with just our conservation status, but also of who we are as human beings and what our role is really in Namibia.
As George Monbiot is discovering, it's celebrities and the media who whip up the hatred.
I think the media have a moral responsibility in a democracy to tell the truth. And I think when they deliberately set out to mislead, it erodes the very cornerstone of our society. Where is free speech? Where is honest dialogue? How can we debate as a nation how we manage our important things in our wildlife? You and I are passionate about wildlife, Charlie. And how anybody can then try and redirect people to think that we're somehow a villain of the piece when we've spent a whole life. And I live with deer, they live in my garden, they look at me through the window every day. And there's a whole honesty gone from this. And I think, I'd use a term for mainstream media, I think it's become morally bereft.
As a society, I think we've really forgotten how to be good neighbors with each other. We have so much division. But at the end of the day, we all live on the same planet. Do we want to make sure it's better than the way we found it? We want it to be healthy. I do. I would think everybody else does.
So emotionally, it's difficult. And it's especially difficult to try and explain that to your children, who are the real people and who we all bring up to be respectful of all people, all opinions, all wildlife. So how do you explain that to a child? How do you explain bullying to a child?
There are some, like Robbie Kruger from the campaigning YouTube channel Blood Origins, who preach stay dignified, even turn the other cheek.
You can't change the motivation of someone in terms of how they feel about like you or me. And so if I can just be the best version of myself to them, towards them, I guess I'm not trying to influence them, but I'm influencing, say, the 5,000 or 10,000 people that watch me interact with that individual and go, wow, this guy isn't what I expected him to be.
Even of our local police officers, when we complained about the harassment we were getting, and they say to you, well, it's the job you do, you should expect it. But I don't see that when somebody threatens a First Minister or a member of the Scottish Parliament or of Westminster. The next thing you know, they've full police guard. We just got told get on with it.
George Monbiot feels hurt that his former friends now think he is apparently a Nazi. Well, welcome to our world, George. Your former friends are not nice people.